What about this time? Oh, never mind. I don't have a pick.
What?
I was going to bust out a sick flat pick and guitar solo, but I don't have a pick.
Useless.
Damn it. All right, I'm putting it down. I just want to impress you, Tom. That's all I want.
Should I just play little fills while we talk?
Yeah, let's do a sort of. Yeah, we'll do a little call and response sort of thing. Call and response, Tom. Please don't interrupt, okay? That does not fly on my show.
I can't even hardly hear myself through my headphones. So.
Phil knows interruptions are not acceptable on this show.
Play the Heavy Hands opening music.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Perfect. Da, da, da.
Hello and welcome to another edition. What the hell was that? What the hell was that sound? Tom?
It was my work computer.
Oh my God.
Telling me to do my job.
He just had to make himself known. He could feel that I was a full 30 seconds away from introducing him and giving him a chance to speak. It's like, let me just announce myself with a sort of gong sound effect. Welcome to Heavy Hands. I'm your host, Connor Rebush. Phil McKenzie is here as always, but we are joined, unusually, by Tom Elliott of thefightsite.com. Tom, thank you so much for joining us again.
Hello, hello.
Finally got there. I'm sure it feels great, doesn't it? You're on the show again.
It does.
Tom, when was the last time we had you on, Tom? It's been a little while.
God, what was it? I don't recall. It has been a while. This is my third appearance, but it's been quite some time.
Yeah, how dare you not remember the exact specific fight you were discussing then. It's not like there's an embarrassing surfeit of fights that we have to sift through every week. Less embarrassing than usual, certainly this week, as we have a 3-title fight pay-per-view ahead of us, and 2 of those title fights are even kind of good. So it's going to be a fun one to discuss. Jan Blachowicz is pointlessly defending the light heavyweight title against Israel Adesanya. Not the fight that I wanted, certainly, but there is obviously some interest there. And just getting a chance to see Israel Adesanya perform. Very happy about that. Then we've got Amanda Nunes versus Megan Anderson, which I think we're going to discuss last, because the third title fight on the docket is arguably, probably not arguably, the most interesting. That is the bantamweight title fight in which Peter, or should we start now so we don't have a Fedor situation on our hands and call him Piotr, Jan, is defending the bantamweight strap against Aljamain Sterling. All 3 of those title fights are going to comprise the bulk of our discussion today, and we may even have time at the end to touch on something like, say, Islam Makhachev versus Drew Dober, a very interesting fight from the main card. Main card's looking good here, folks. And Tom, we are very happy to have you on to discuss it. Whatever the last fight we talked about with you was, you did mention then you wanted to.
I think it may have been John Jones. I think it may have been.
No, it was UFC 250. So it was another Amanda Nunes and Aljamain Sterling card. It was Sterling Sandhagen and Nunes Spencer.
Sterling Sandhagen
and Sal Garbrandt.
It is true that I only know about the bantamweight division.
It's the only one, as far as I'm concerned. And
it is the best one, though.
Men and women.
I've chosen well.
Men and women. That's right, Phil. Women's bantamweight. Really where the action is at.
Yeah.
Tom mentioned specifically he wanted to come back to discuss Jan Sterling. So we'll be spending this first segment looking forward to that. But before we get into it, Blachowicz Adesanya. Tom, I just want to get your thoughts first. So we have some context for me saying, why is this happening? How do you feel about this booking?
So I will read my notes verbatim. My first notes. Jan is big and slow. He likes to wait and explode. He's gonna die. Beyond a puncher's chance, not many routes to victory. I stand by that note that I wrote at 1:44 a.m. last night, watching him fight Thiago Santos, because It's just really hard to see how Jan wins this fight. He's not going to have much of a size advantage, I don't think. He will be thicker, certainly, than Adesanya. I mean, he's obviously a big, strong guy.
Yeah.
But he's giving up 2 inches of height and a few more of reach. I have to check to be exactly sure. But, he's not going to have the normal kind of size bullying capability that you would want a light heavyweight to have against a middleweight coming up. Mm-hmm. He is quite slow. He's slow even by light heavyweight standards, I think. So on the slower side anyway. Adesanya is not slow. He doesn't have a ton of diversity in his attacks. He tends to wait for long periods of time and then blitz out with a series of attacks. He's corrected that to a certain extent recently. He does work behind his jab more now. He employs his kicking game, I think more functionally outside of just the blitzing, but it's still a tendency in his game. And the way I see this fight going is that when he is trying to wait, Adesanya will be poking at him with jabs, with quick kicks, just trying to provoke him into exploding. He will do so. Adesanya will let him do that 2 or 3 times until he's figured out exactly what Jan looks like when he does it. And then he is going to start countering him until Jan dies. So that's my read on the fight.
All right. Well, we'll be back after this break to discuss the next title fight. No, I think you pretty much laid it out, Tom. That's more or less how I feel. For me, fights like this where, it just feels one-sided and like who cares about Israel Adesanya having a second belt at light heavyweight of all places? I want to see him fight middleweights, for fuck's sake. They're kind of good sometimes. Just that compounded with the fact that it does feel like really one-sided booking. It just feels so opportunistic. And clearly the UFC has in mind, making Adesanya Jones down the line. And this is the best they could get, since, they lost the chance to make that at light heavyweight. They're setting something up, but this feels a little too much like a stepping stone for the reasons that you laid out. Jan Blachowicz is just not the level. He's a good striker for light heavyweight. Israel Adesanya is a good striker for striking. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do know what you mean.
Yeah. And I'm even I know you were trying to cover your ass a bit. I'm even gonna go ahead and say, I don't think Jan's really gotten that much better at the blitzing. He's gonna do it. It's just a thing he does. It was in fact instrumental to his win over Dominic Reyes that got us all so excited.
Fair enough.
He did plenty of those blitzes, and Reyes is just not the counterpuncher that Adesanya is. So, what do you say, Phil?
It's really hard. I find it a really weird fight to envision, in fact, just because, we've just never seen Blachowicz against anyone who could really be classed as like a good striker. It's sort of running off your point earlier, Connor. Who is the best striker that Blachowicz has fought? Is it Corey Anderson? Jimmy Manuwa? Is it Thiago Santos?
Yeah. Those are your choices, really. And potentially, I guess, Dominic Reyes, whose striking never looked worse than in that fight.
Mm-hmm. I really want to say, I really want to think of fights of just being, as just being like total shutouts.
Right.
And I do think there's a few things that Jan can do. Mm-hmm. The main thing is, Izzy's response to jabs, even like big lunging jabs, is generally to lean back. And whilst, Blachowicz is not he's not as fast as Whittaker. He is at least a bit bigger and presumably more powerful. And I think that's the kind of jab that he likes, is to sit behind that. Like he has a kind of leaping up jab that I think, Whittaker landed on Adesanya multiple times. Yes. I do agree with Tommy in that, that Adesanya was basically waiting for Whittaker to follow that up so he could kill him. But it is at least a point scoring tool. And I think that Izzy does like to move away and lean if Blachowicz, another thing that like worked against Whittaker was his tendency to just like, he was just trying to land the jab and then either go for the left hook or the like big right hand. He wasn't really punching into kicks a lot. At least Blachowicz, if he's not getting countered, will be able to punch into kicks because Izzy is generally leaning off. We have seen Izzy troubled by wrestling. I'm still not willing to say that he's got like an elite ground game. But Blachowicz is generally like an upper body guy. He's going to have to get into the clinch for extended periods. Which again, he's fine at.
Yeah.
But he's not a devastating clinch fighter. We saw that against Jacare, right? He's largely just like, be big and strong and try not to get too tired.
Yeah.
So I'm not really sure if he can get takedowns, but he is super nasty if, for whatever reason it does hit the mat. He's actually like a really dangerous top position grappler.
Yeah, weirdly. And I for some reason it never dawned on me until really recently just how huge Jan Blachowicz is. His upper body is very big, and I think that figures into some of the defensive wrestling success, and the offensive wrestling success we've seen him have. He just has a very powerful upper body. He's got Kyle, if Kyle is listening, Tom, he's about to cream his jeans at this. He's got a Bob Fitzsimmons physique.
Oh,
Kyle on that. You know what I mean? He's got really scrawny legs, but any power he has comes from this big, broad back. He has like a blacksmith's back, like Bob Fitzsimmons.
I was going to say it's from his days blacksmithing in Witcher 3.
Yeah, Jan Blachowicz will whip out horseshoes to entertain the crowd. He'll just bust out a horseshoe in 3 minutes flat. Yeah, I agree with you, in general, Phil. I always, when I come across a matchup like this, I want to find the little avenues, the little wrinkles in the apparent loser's game that could make the fight more interesting. And I think the jab is a huge one. Robert Whittaker had big success with his jab, and Jan Blachowicz is arguably a little better than Whittaker at actually getting his feet into range with his jab in a solid position. One thing I really like.
You're gonna get killed.
One thing I really like about Blachowicz' jab is how often he doubles it up.
Mm-hmm.
He has a snappy jab that is also really rapidly gathering information for him. If he steps in and it doesn't connect, his eyes are still on his opponent. He's now at a slightly improved sort of penetrative angle that jab with the step got him. He will just instantly, without a second's thought, fire a second jab right down the pipe. And I think double jabs could be one of the most effective weapons we've seen anyone try to use against Adesanya. It's what else they lead to that makes this still feel like a one-sided matchup. But I do think that jab as a rhythm-breaking tool, as an entry tool, is really interesting here, because we can say all day that Blachowicz hasn't fought anyone like Adesanya, and of course he hasn't. Adesanya hasn't actually fought all that many competent jab-based kickboxers, especially not ones, and this is the other wrinkle for me, that are good defensively. And as vulnerable as Jan Blachowicz is coming forward, and as unorthodox and risky as his technique may be at times off the back foot, he's a pretty good defensive fighter, largely just because he is experienced and aware. He keeps his eyes open, he stays in a relatively good position, and he is ready with specific defensive techniques. He checks kicks. That's particularly interesting here. He's quite good about checking kicks. He competed largely with Thiago Santos at that range. In fact, he might have beat Thiago without blitzing in if he just hadn't done the blitzes. It was possible.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things that I was kind of musing about thinking about this fight and trying to come up with good analogs is thinking back to the atrocious fight between Izzy and Yoel Romero, because in that fight, Izzy was presented with an opponent who essentially just wasn't going to do anything.
Yeah.
Right? Who wasn't going to leave. And while you would think that someone like Izzy would spend most of that time like just very safely pecking away, it really froze him mentally. Yep. Now, that's obviously Yoel Romero, and Yoel Romero is a different level of threat to explode and murder you with a single technique than Jan Blachowicz is. But it would be really interesting to see that in between those blitzes, when Jan is taking time off and being more relaxed and just defending and kind of watching what he's doing, if we do see Adesanya being more active, as he's shown against some other opponents other than Yoel Romero, who were somewhat defensive, or if he does end up being frozen as well because he's afraid of the counter. I mean, Jan actually does clip people in exchanges. And again, this is one of the things that is true about moving up. You know, Adesanya's power will be fine, but Jan's chin will probably be better than virtually anybody that he's fought, other than maybe Romero, which didn't really get tested.
It's an underrated attribute. It's an underrated attribute of his. He is a very durable fighter.
He is. Mm-hmm. So, you know, what happens if Izzy does get into an exchange with him in, you know, let's say Jan blitzes in and Izzy hits him and Jan just doesn't care all that much and just cracks him with a left hook. Mm-hmm. And not saying he would finish him that way. It's a possibility. But, you know, if some exchange like that happens early, how would that change the character of the fight? And could we be in for a long and boring night of neither guy wanting to do a whole bunch? What do you guys think? I mean, is that a realistic possibility here?
I mean, if I trusted Jan not to get impatient and blitz, if he would just straight up insist on countering, and otherwise it's just kicks and jabs as leads, it would instantly become a much more competitive fight. Like, I think, like Adesanya, we can all sort of afford to just likewise wait for Jan to make the first error. And his errors are going to be much worse and I think more dramatically capitalized upon than anything Adesanya is going to do. Although, like you said, Jan Blachowicz, good defensively, and when he is countering, genuinely quite dangerous.
Yeah.
It doesn't need a whole lot of wind up to land powerful techniques, puts his punches together really well. And so it's, I don't know, I would love this to be, who knows, maybe Champion Jan is a super disciplined fucking fighter. And becomes much more conservative and just, I mean, this will be one of his first, he's had a couple 5-round affairs, not many though, right?
He went 5 rounds with Jacare, and just looking down his record, that is the only fight, regardless of what they were scheduled for, that's the only one that's gone for 5 rounds.
Famously, he was someone who couldn't go 3.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but also that was a reputation earned before his 3-round rematch with Jimmy Manuwa, in which, yes, he certainly got tired, but still looked very capable in round 3. So I think some of that has changed over the years. The stamina, the composure has certainly gotten better for Jan Blachowicz, and who knows, maybe championship Jan is just a maddeningly patient fighter who's willing to have 5-round fights like that one with Jacare Souza, which, as dismal as it was, I don't think that would be the worst play here. By a long shot, that really might be the way to go.
What kind of a factor do you guys think Jan's body kicking might be in this fight? Because I'm really divided on this. Because on the one hand, very big man, powerful kicker. Kick is, you know, that hard round kick is not an easy weapon to deal with in terms of just taking it, especially if you're a middleweight coming up and a long and fairly slim one like Adesanya. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, do you see that as a weapon that Jan could use to cut Izzy off, reduce his movement, and really tire him out?
Sure. I think it's always a good idea when you have an opponent who commits to a sort of bounding footwork on retreat to follow your punches with a kick. That's like one of those things that whenever I've done scouting reports, me and the dude Schwan Humes have joked about this often, that because both of us will provide scouting reports for camps now and again. And we both joke about how we're always like putting in advisory things like hit the body, set things up with the jab, like as if they're novel to a certain matchup. But like, a lot of these things are one size fits all. It's just about styles and looks. And absolutely, I think Adesanya can be chased and put into, you know, his footwork is great, but in some ways it's also not. He can put himself in weird positions. quite often that just people aren't typically comfortable capitalizing on. If you can anticipate one of those angles, you might catch him really square.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's still, he's obviously significantly advanced in terms of, the striking, the way striking works, but he still does the Anderson Silva thing of backing away and leaning.
Yeah.
It's totally possible to chase him with a double jab. And I think, against a tall guy who leans away from shots, like following up your strikes with body kicks is a really good idea. Going back to the Romero boring counter striker thing, I think there's two elements which would be really useful, which were useful in that fight for Romero. Apart from being, an insane god beast from like some other dimension, he was totally unwilling to bite on feints, presumably in part enabled by his own like deep insanity. And he's a southpaw, and I'm still not hugely convinced that Izzy is that great against southpaws. His only like really, all his worst performances in the UFC have come against southpaws, with the exception of the Derek Brunson fight, where like Brunson was barely in a stance in that fight.
It's not even fair to call it southpaw, really, is it?
Yeah.
All we can say is that Brunson was left-handed in that fight.
Also a fight which was much more competitive than I thought it was on rewatch, up until like the finishing sequence where, Brunson imploded. But yeah, I mean, I just don't think Izzy is all that great with dealing with left hands. He didn't look good against Gastelum or Silva, or indeed, what's his face? Little weird-looking dude. Italian.
Kelvin Gastelum. Kelvin Gastelum's
Yeah.
not Italian.
Thank you, Connor. So yeah, I mean, I wish Jan was southpaw. Then I would feel more confident in at least hoping for a weird fight. But that too is going to make like the body kick a bit trickier to land. Although Jan does have like a nice lead leg body kick to like in the close stance matchup. He's a surprisingly agile man.
He is. He's a very deft kicker, and he has always had that the quick but surprisingly powerful kicks. It was actually something I think specifically mentioned by commentary in that Reyes fight. They're like, somebody pointed out that Jan doesn't even seem to be throwing his kicks hard a lot of the time, but they do land with authority. So yeah, I think that would be a very viable weapon.
I think it's also that Izzy is much happier low kicking against in close stance. That it just allows his sort of jab low kick game to thrive a lot better.
Absolutely, and I think that's part of it. I also think part of the left hand matchup that he doesn't like is specifically, as you kind of alluded to, Phil, the left hand itself. Because it's not just southpaws, it's orthodox fighters' left hands that tend to give him the most trouble as well. I think a lot of what Adesanya does, a lot of the way he will build himself into the fight off of his counters and everything, is like anticipating the thing that comes after the jab. And that's usually the right hand. You expect your opponent to throw some bullshit out there, and then what they really want to land is usually, coming immediately second. And for most fighters, even a lot of good strikers, that's like the last thing they've thought about. There's setup and there's execution. And the execution is most often the right hand. And when it isn't, when it's a big left hook off the jab or something, those tend to be the shots that catch Adesanya by surprise. And I think, southpaws compound that uncomfortable angle with the fact that just the jab isn't quite as comfortable to throw. Angles feel more sort of naked and exposed when you're going for the jab. Can we just quickly mention though, at the risk of just trying to poke holes in Adesanya's game and making him seem less impressive than he is, why are we so confident that when Jan Blachowicz does commit to something, he's going to get murked? Tom, any thoughts on that?
Because a 200+ pound man throwing with good technique, hitting a guy who's out over his feet, square in the chin, is going to do damage.
Yeah. And Israel Adesanya is, for all the trouble he might have occasionally anticipating the wrong strike, over the course of a fight, he will put together a strategy to deal with basically whatever comes at him. And that involves footwork and head movement. I think the big thing about Adesanya, and this is certainly will connect to people like Piotr Jan, whom we will discuss later, is the connectivity of his game. Like every single piece, he's a really adaptable fighter. So there's not like a set web, a set sort of system in mind, I don't think. I mean, there definitely are basic tracks that his game tends to follow. But it's like each individual piece has like several nodes on it that can be connected in different configurations with any other piece. So a pullback, Adesanya is always thinking, if I pull back from this strike, what next? I can move this direction. I can move that direction. After I move, what next? You know, you saw this in the fight with Kelvin Gastelum, who definitely gave Adesanya considerable trouble early. And I think even more than the shot that he landed in the first round on this most recent rewatch, I was just struck by the sort of psychology that we really saw stripped bare in the Romero fight. Adesanya doesn't like being countered or surprised. Like, he has an ego. I think it makes him profoundly uncomfortable. He doesn't stay super chill. He gets like tense and wired.
It's ironic, but I think in many ways he's not actually that confident a fighter.
No, I think he has to convince himself that he is the best each fight.
Yeah. He's got a lot of that kind of Conor McGregor kind of thing going, where so much of his bravado, I think, is, as much as anything else, just trying to convince himself that he is unbeatable and that he can just style on guys.
Yeah, but we know,
because you can see when he has, if you go back and watch his fights, especially his kickboxing fights, when he has a huge edge, like when he knows that he's safe and he's going to beat someone, he's much more relaxed.
Yes.
And there's actually less bullshit. It's when he's in with somebody that he is genuinely worried about, the bullshit mounts, and I think it's at least half him trying to convince himself that he is the better man.
It's half, you know, trying to draw something out so he can work his way into the fight and then start building. And it's half, like trying to con the other guy, trying to intimidate him. Like, it's straight up bullshit. Like, look at all these things. Please show me something. Please show me something. Please show me something. And against Gastelum, you can see that. Despite that, he does have this connectivity, this systematic nature to his game. So
he does.
As the fight goes on, once something starts working, pretty quickly that evolves into like volleyball volley style exchanges, you know, where he'll hit Gastelum. He knows Gastelum's going to throw back. He evades. He hits again. He evades the next recounter. He hits again with 2 strikes, each one becoming more effective than the last. That's something I've never seen Jan Blachowicz do.
Well, he's coming to the light heavyweight division at the right time because, you know, for a division that historically had its share of power wrestlers with brutal top games, man, there is just none of that in light heavyweight right now.
Jan Blachowicz is light heavyweight champion. Now is the time.
But you know, assuming that Adesanya does win this, we are going to get to see a fight that and I say this with no shred of irony, I'm very interested in. We get to see Adesanya, Glover Teixeira.
Yeah.
I mean, I bet we don't, but
probably not.
Don't say that.
We're probably getting Adesanya Jones, or we just talk about that for 2 years and it never happens.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm really feeling that one coming down the pike. But
it's a coin flip on whether or not Jones ever fights again, in my opinion. But
yeah, I'm doubtful of that myself as well. But that's for a future episode. Let's go ahead and wrap up this long first segment. Let's make some real official specific picks just so we can all be embarrassed in equal measure. Phil? You were right on Usman.
I'm gonna take Adesanya by 4th round knockout.
Nice.
I don't want to though. I don't like it.
Yeah.
Tom? I think it'll take a round less. I'll say Adesanya in the 3rd, and specifically he'll catch Jan in the middle of a blitz, and even if that doesn't one hit kill him, that'll be the beginning of the end.
Okay, well, just purely to be different, I'm going to take the outside track. I'm going to say that Jan is unusually stoic, just as he was in the fight with Jacare. We know he has it in him, and that we get Israel Adesanya by decision, which sounds like shit. But all right, let's take a break. When we come back, we are skipping right over the official co-main event. We're going to get to that last because Amanda Nunes versus Megan Anderson really doesn't have that much to it, whereas Petr Yan versus Aljamain Sterling, it has a lot. And so brace yourselves for an equally long segment 2. We'll be right back after this to talk about that. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. Welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are moving on down the main card here of UFC 259, and that means, really moving down, like skipping over one of the fights, because it's time for Petr Yan versus Aljamain Sterling, which is by far the most compelling, not just title fight, but arguably the most compelling fight on the entire card. One I think that especially like hardcore fans have been clamoring for some time. Probably, I don't know. How do the casuals feel about Aljamain Sterling? I feel like he had a hard time getting over, but that has a lot to do with how Dana White seems to feel about him in particular.
Yeah, I don't think he has gotten over. I don't get the sense that many people outside kind of the hardcore fan base care about him all that much, unfortunately. But they should. He's very, very good.
Yes, for those of us who obsessively follow this shit, this is a fascinating fight that we've kind of felt building for some time now.
I think it's the best fight the UFC can make right now.
Yes, I was going to say, this is I can't think of a more intriguing fight that the UFC could feasibly put together at any weight class.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Well, let's go ahead and try to get into why that is. Tom, I'm very happy to have you here with us for this one. Specifically, you mentioned wanting to come on
very
and
much
discuss
so.
this, and of course, Phil and I don't know what is the first thing I want to ask you is what is grappling?
Grappling is wrestling on the mat, as far as I can tell. It's funny you say that, actually, because it's a term that everybody uses, and I feel like it's very poorly defined, like what the line is between grappling and wrestling. But I think generally when people say it, what they're talking about is doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu and MMA.
That's right. Doing submission moves, which are technically allowed.
Yes. There is literally no line in my mind between wrestling and Brazilian jiu-jitsu once you're on the mat. It's all the same shit. It's just whether or not you can pin somebody or have to submit them. But people call it grappling, and Aljamain Sterling is really, really good at it.
Mm-hmm. It's more of a focus kind of thing. And as we learned, maybe we should just start calling it wrestling, because jiu-jitsu is not real. As we learned in Adolfo Vieira's recent fight, among many others.
It's true. When he lost, my black belt actually disappeared. It just
spontaneously turned to dust, like in the Marvel movies.
Yeah,
they all did.
Faded as if it was in a picture in Back to the Future. It just sort of vanished from your hands.
It was more like that, yes. Yeah. But luckily for Aljamain Sterling, he is a wrestler as well as a very good grappler. So he won't have that problem of having to rely solely on jiu-jitsu with no way to get Petr Yan to the mat, though. As it happens, I think that is actually the crux of this matchup, is whether or not he can consistently create grappling exchanges.
It always is, irrespective of his actual wrestling ability. Can you get them to the ground is always the, by design, the biggest hurdle for any grappler. So tell me, in this matchup, do you see jiu-jitsu being real? Can Aljamain Sterling get Petr Yan to the ground? I think that's the first big question we have to ask.
I think it's going to be hard.
Yeah.
And I've kind of moved on this a little bit. When I first started thinking about this matchup, I was fairly confident that Sterling would be able to create grappling exchanges. And I want to be clear. What Aljamain Sterling needs to do is not to take Petr Yan down. He doesn't need to like blast double him and get on top side control and go to mount and hit him with elbows. Like he's not that kind of a wrestler. What he needs to do is create enough of a scramble that he has chances to take Jan's back. And that's really the core of this matchup is if he can, even if he never gets a clean takedown, if he can create grappling exchanges consistently and he can get to Jan's back with enough time remaining in a round, he will probably finish it because Aljamain Sterling is just he's the best finisher from the back in the game today. He's lights out at it. Corey Sandhagen in his last fight. Corey Sandhagen's a very good grappler in his own right. You can see that in his fights with like Rafael Assunção, for instance. And Aljamain just once he got on his back, it was instant. He trapped his arm, choked him out, game over. And I think he would do the same thing to Petr Yan if he can get to his back. And to complete my earlier thought, I initially thought he probably could, because he's pretty good at making contact with single legs. He's very good in clinches at doing slide bys and getting to the back directly from inside clinches. But watching Yan and the way he is able to force disengagement from clinches, the way he's able to largely shuck off people who are shooting without a lot of setup, I really have my doubts. Another thing is that Aljamain Sterling is not really a guy who's big on reactive shots. And I think if he was, George St. Pierre at bantamweight, where anytime a guy came forward with a big right hand, he shot a double and could take people clean off their feet, I would give him a lot better chances in this fight because Petr Yan certainly gives you the chance to do that. He's coming forward and throwing hard. Mm-hmm. But Aljo likes to shoot when he's pressuring because what he really likes to do when he shoots is he likes to pick up a single, run you into the cage, get into some sort of body lock, and then grind you down, take your back, and submit you. It's going to be very, very, very hard for him to do that against Yan. Now, that said, if you watch some of Jan's earlier fights against like Jinsu Song, for instance, when he does get taken down, his scrambling involves a lot of back exposure. And sorry, go ahead.
No, please continue.
Yeah, and so if he does that against Sterling, if Sterling is able to get him to the point where he's having to defend takedowns by turning away and exposing his back, Sterling absolutely can take his back and finish him.
Yeah, I think that's sort of the sort of theme of trying to undo Petr Yan's game that really occurred to me watching his footage this week is how much it is not about succeeding with the first thing. That is really how his game operates. Petr Yan is a very layered fighter. Mm-hmm. And it's, he's like, it's almost, I think it's in fact part of what disguises his athleticism from people. Because like Khabib Nurmagomedov, people do not seem to regard Yan as the freak athlete that he is.
I agree with that.
I don't.
You
I don't think he's a freak athlete.
I think he's really quick and powerful. Phil.
I just generally, I need to see people do something crazy if they're a really good athlete. I think he's really loaded with good fighter attributes, which is almost like being a good athlete, but isn't. I've never seen him do anything where I was like, man, that was really, really fast. Or like that was insane balance. Or I think he's just like a incredibly rugged dude with an incredible mind who's just a massive natural fighter. Like it's like the old McGregor thing. Like I think he has unbreakable cardio, tons of durability. I think he has decent balance, but I don't know, I've never seen him like closing distance or even like hand speed and thought this is an A+ athlete. I mean, in some ways his physical gifts are more useful for MMA than, being able to cover distance very quickly. I would probably rather be unbreakably tough and have infinite cardio than most of the traditional athletic gifts. Mm-hmm. But I just think of him as a really, really rugged guy.
I think at a certain point, you get into an intractable discussion of what counts as athleticism. Because, I could say, in counter to you saying he's not an athlete. He just has a bunch of great physical attributes, as being slightly paradoxical, right?
But Carlos Condit has a bunch of great physical attributes, but
he's got two.
You wouldn't
chin
class
and
him as a
cardio.
professional athlete. Yeah.
No, I think what makes it hard with Jan is that because he has pretty good fundamental boxing technique, it's very tempting to think that that's what makes him look fast and what makes him look like he's hitting hard. And it certainly plays a role. But, I mean, God, you watch that fight with Jose Aldo and, like, some of the shots he throws in combination, I think his hands are fast.
I agree.
Especially for the level of power with which he is throwing. Like, generally, most guys can throw one shot really, really fast and hard, but they can't throw 3 or 4 in a row. Because to do so, unless you're very athletic, requires just putting too much into a single shot, to really get a high degree of power and speed. Jan can throw 3 or 4 punch combinations, and every shot is just lightning fast and really, really goddamn hard.
I agree. I think,
I think too, if you sorry, Connor, but last thing on this, if you watch that Aldo fight too, there are a couple of instances where Aldo does go to take him down, and the speed with which Jan reacts to those takedown attempts gets Aldo off and resets his stance. He is very, very quick in those exchanges, surprisingly so. So I think I'm with Connor on this one.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the hand speed actually does stand out. In fact, I'm gonna slightly counter something you said there, Tom. I think this is sort of what I was getting at with the discussion of layers with Petr Yan's game. I think he sort of does sacrifice technique, but never as the first move. That was sort of what threw Jimmy Rivera off, or the 2 times in that fight where he kind of did just decide to just nakedly sell out. And Rivera's success in that fight was all about countering the preliminary stuff, the initiative stuff that Petr Yan throws. That is the part where he looks like an incredibly technical boxer. He has such an educated lead hand that, like, I think the thing that disguises his athleticism is how willingly he turns it off, because he knows that it works in spots. But unlike taking like a Tyron Woodley approach, or a Yoel Romero approach of saying, okay, then I have to cut all my volume so I can surprise people, he instead just throws the technical easy stuff first. He breaks your rhythm. He puts something in your face. He draws out your reactions, and then he explodes.
He builds a lot too. I think one thing that's obscured by the fact that that he's mostly been in 3-round fights in the UFC, right? When people have seen him, is he really does up his volume and build throughout. And I think that fight with Aldo really showed you what that looks like, because once he hit the 3rd round, he hit a gear. And he just stayed in that high gear for the remainder of the fight until he knocked Aldo out. And you didn't really see that when he was only going 3 rounds. So much, but I think that he absolutely will do that against Aljo, where if the fight goes deep, he will have reached a point where he's got his reads and he's willing to turn it on, and he can do it and sustain it. Yeah.
So I see Jan as a fighter who uses the technique to disguise the athleticism. And so I think you see a lot of moments like this, and Jose Aldo was able to capitalize on this, as was Jimmy Rivera. And this ties into what you were saying about the ground game, Tom, where you don't have to like blast Jan off his feet. You don't have to penetrate that first layer of combined technique and athleticism, really. You have to get him in athletic mode so he starts doing instinctive things that make him vulnerable. And on the feet, this sort of reveals itself in, like I said, the educated lead, the feinting, all these layers to set things up. And then when he commits, technique is slightly more of an afterthought.
Yeah, he is a fan of the big the breaching whale hook. Not quite to the JDS level, but he will throw himself off balance
overthrows.
With his big right hand.
He's so technical before he commits, but when he commits, he overthrows consistently.
Yeah, he does.
He in fact, it's part of his game because he likes to fall through and shift into follow-up punches.
Yes. But He really likes to throw kicks off his
Yes.
off his shifts.
He expects people to be intimidated by that first rush, which, fair enough, they typically are. But when Jose Aldo and Jimmy Rivera were able to evade the first committed move, ignore all the bullshit, time the first commitment, and immediately counter, they had lots and lots of success. And I think this is sort of a parallel to the way it works on the ground. Like, you don't have to beat Jan outright. You have to get him into a space where he is just being athletic. And in the grappling department, that means giving up his back and trying to create an instant scramble, something which Sterling is remarkably good at capitalizing on. So I think that's an interesting sort of cross phase element of Jan's game that I've seen. So here's the other thing. It does seem like it's going to be kind of hard to get there, right? Because Aljamain Sterling's striking has gotten so much better. And I think the natural impulse for him, against an aggressive, generally pressuring opponent like Jan would be to do what he did to the last aggressive pressuring guy he fought, Pedro Munoz, and sort of try to outmaneuver him. And I think there may be some real benefit there may be some real sort of value in that. I've not really seen anyone do that to Jan super effectively. And
that was kind of what I was going to say.
Right?
Is that the general sort of, analysis of the matchup is that Sterling needs to take Jan down or Jan will just carve him up on the feet. And like, is it that cut and dried?
Yeah. I'm curious about that too. Jose Aldo stood right in front of Jan. Jimmy Rivera did a lot of the same, but when he moved, was able to force Jan to reset. The fact that Jan's technique, the technical side of his game, which can compensate for a mobile opponent, is not super dangerous, but the part that is super dangerous is a little more contingent upon whether or not the opponent stands right in front of you. I think there's something to that. We'll get into that. Tom, you had reservations. What do you think?
So I think that to the extent that Aljo can stay at longer range and play with his kicks, he will be competitive on the feet. I think enforcing that kicking distance will be extremely important. And he's a very good kicker. He's a very good arsenal of kicks. He has good straight line kicks in addition to good round kicks. Hopefully he should be able to keep Jan off of him a bit. Though, I think given Jan's training background, he's pretty adept at dealing with kicks. What I worry about more is that, like, when you watch the Munoz fight, a lot of what Aljo does to get out of trouble there is like really exaggerated head movement, switching stances, some backing straight up before he angles out. And his punching, while it's effective, he's hitting Munoz from odd angles. It's very loopy. It's not tight and controlled. And I think he's going to have a real problem dealing with the tightness, the power, and the speed of Jan coming back at him in combination.
He's one of a million fighters who does the right things in the wrong way. But unlike other people I've said that about, like Petr Yan or like, say, Manny Pacquiao, he doesn't have the insane athleticism to back it up.
He doesn't. It's I think this is where kind of like fight fan preconceptions can get in people's ways because, you see a guy like, he calls himself the Funk Master. He does a lot of janky things. He's a black guy from New York.
It really is the last thing, isn't it?
He must be like super, super athletic, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. He's not that athletic.
No.
He's perfectly fine athlete. He's not bad, but is he more athletic than, John Dodson or Douglas Silva? Yeah.
And in this case, we specifically mean like 0 to 60 style speed, explosion, that kind of stuff. He's not on that spectrum, not very high on that spectrum.
He's really not. Which is one reason I think he's had to rely so much on his grappling game because he's an extremely technically adept grappler. You can get away with having less athleticism if you're a very technically adept grappler. Even his wrestling game is based largely on doing less athletic wrestling things. As I referenced earlier, he's not blast doubling people off their feet, right? He's getting into single legs, penetrating deep, and then making his way to the back or chain wrestling a guy down. So I do think that I think there will be instances in this fight where you will see Aljo trying to counter Jan with these loopy punches, and Jan will just beat him to the punch and hurt him.
Like, but will he that easily? Like, Jan is primarily, I think, an offensively keyed fighter.
Yeah.
Like, I wouldn't describe him as someone who is super difficult to punch.
No, in fact, I think he is very jabbable.
Yeah. I mean, this is because a big part of the Sterling Munoz fight, it wasn't just the kicking game. It was just the fact that Munoz would plod forward, being Munoz, and Sterling would just punch him like a million times,
and he would just eat it because he's Pedro Munoz.
He would just eat it. Obviously, Jan is much better defensively than Pedro Munoz. I mean, well, actually, can I take the much better away?
He's better.
He is better defensively than Pedro Munoz. But, like, a lot of the work that Jimmy Rivera got done was not necessarily on the counter. It was, when he went after Jan, Jan just still tended to shell. That's the thing, because Jan is the building fighter, I think he is another fighter who needs his first connection in order to get going. And I mean, I'm not sure. The sort of relative heights and reaches of these guys is very weird, because apparently it says that Jan is slightly taller than Sterling, which I find
5'7", I think.
Yeah, I think it said Jan is like 5'7.5", which just seems weird. But he certainly fights from he fights. I think he fights shorter. He is close to the ground. Yep. He is more hunched.
A lot of his defense involves ducking undershots. He's a lower
and
fighter.
He is primarily looking to make you do things with his left hand so that he can hit you with his right hand, or he's switching it up.
He's also just much stockier.
An incredibly good southpaw. Yeah.
Sorry, Phil. He's also just a much stockier build. That adds to the perception of height as well. That Sterling is lanky. Mm-hmm. He's got long limbs.
But he's not. I wouldn't class him as a fantastic counterpuncher or a great defensive fighter. He's an offensive whirlwind.
Yeah.
Who has been I think has developed his defensive grappling incredibly. I mean, it still blows my mind how young Jan is in his career.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that he was able to have fights like that one with that rematch with Magomedov.
Yeah.
How many years into his career was he when that happened? It was 2014 it was 3 years into his career. And he was just like, oh yeah, I'm really good at defensive wrestling now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're just going to lose now.
Hey, that's a super athlete thing, Phil. You got to be fair. That's a thing super athletes do, and only super athletes suddenly get good at all phases.
I think he just has an incredible knack for fighting. He's just, we talked about how Adesanya, might not be naturally the most confident guy. Peter Yan has psychopath confidence.
Yes.
Yes, he does.
He's murdered someone, definitely.
Yeah. But, Sterling's shonky cagecraft, occasionally, shonky cagecraft aside, he does, as we said, do the wrong things for the right reasons. He has learned to keep his back off the cage. He's learned to force other people's backs to the cage.
Yep.
I don't think that if he just decides to fill the air in front of him with volume, like he did against Rivera. Munoz, that is a death sentence for him. More than that, I think that kind of approach, when he's getting led on, that is something which leads Jan to shift levels more. That is, he is someone who likes to level change and go after people. One of the things, when Rivera started to go after Jan, this was when Jan started to change his level and started to hit his own takedowns, or at least try to do them. And when he started to try and hit the big blitzes on Rivera more. So I don't think it's it's a really reductive way of looking at things, but someone who can just fill the outside space with volume and be powerful in the clinch it's still a really hard thing to get through. It's why, John Jones was successful for so many years, even if, I don't want to make the terrible Aljamain Sterling John Jones comparison. But it's just like a basic slice of range thing. That Sterling has 2 ranges, I think, and Jan has 1. But I think the main problem is for Sterling is not necessarily like the fact that the striking is a dead zone for him. It's that it's the fact that, and I think someone said this on Twitter, I can't remember who it was, and it was a great point. Sterling hasn't really been an adversity guy. He's been someone who's tended to he's gotten way grittier and way tougher, but he has generally been someone who has dictated the pace of a fight throughout when he's won. What's his toughest
Munoz?
What's his come from behind win?
Well, Munoz is as close as he came to it repeatedly, almost slipping out of control.
Yeah,
so that certainly was adversity.
It's a different kind of thing, right?
Sure.
He still won it 30-27.
Yeah.
Whereas Jan, there's no doubt in anyone's mind this guy is going to always be thinking up new ways to try and win the fight. We saw that in the Rivera bout. He's just more, I think he's just more physically and mentally durable.
He will just go for it.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting point that filling the air with volume in front of him. I do think that there's something to be said for that. Jan isn't a pure counterpuncher by any means. He wants to walk you down and just beat the shit out of you. But one thing that I do think is a real difference between Jan and Munoz that makes that analogy a little bit strained is that one thing Jan is extremely good at is proactive head movement within his combinations and after his shots.
That's how he
you
gets
talk
away
about
with
Munoz
all those.
walking down, like Munoz, when Munoz walks you down, like he pretty much literally just walks at you.
Yeah.
He's there to be popped in the face repeatedly. And frankly, he's really slow of foot. So he was there to be hit by Sterling like that. I just don't know that Jan will be in the same way because he's going to be coming forward with punches. He's going to be harder to hit as he does so. And if he does catch Aljo in the midst of those exchanges, Sterling, when he starts getting into that mode where he's closer up to getting back up to the fence and he's just throwing, kind of filling the air with punches and kicks, his stance often goes to shit a little bit.
Oh yeah.
If he gets caught in the middle of doing so, that's going to be the end. And if Jan gets on top of him, if Jan knocks him down or even takes him down and gets on top, Jan has developed a hell of a nasty top game. It would be ironic, I suppose, for Jan to take Sterling down and beat him up, but it's actually not the most far-fetched outcome for the fight, especially if he hurts him first.
Yeah, he's pretty much gone for takedowns on everyone he's fought, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I agree with a lot of from both sides there. I guess here's my my sort of unified theory of the fight that Aljamain Sterling should fight. Here's why I'm largely with you, Phil. I think there's an avenue there on the feet. I think with Petr Yan, what Aljamain Sterling needs to do in the grappling department is force him past the first layer, right? He needs to just assume he's not going to complete a takedown or whatever, get to that second layer where he can be the deeper technical fighter. On the feet, I think he succeeds if he sticks Yan in the first layer and doesn't let him out of it. Cause Tom, you're on the money with, the only reason Yan gets away with his, as I said, consistently overcommitted power shots is that he preemptively rolls and ducks under, counters that might be coming as he throws himself out of position. It's like the famed lead right of Floyd Mayweather. That punch was always followed by a duck or a roll and then a pivot. Always. Whether a counter was actually coming back or not. That's what you do when you know you're throwing yourself out of position to land. Jan's really good at that. So the more that I think Sterling allows Jan to set up a target in front of him to create little timing and rhythm traps with his jab, and then to time things and dash in, he's better suited to a deeper, more layered striking exchange. Not only does he account for that, not only is he just a naturally building fighter, but he's just faster and harder hitting. So like, you don't want to get into that kind of fight, especially if you're Aljamain Sterling and your technique deeper in exchanges is certainly no better than Jan's, and arguably worse, and the consequences are going to be worse.
Damn.
So yeah, I think that's the thing with Jan. He gets away with it there. But I think because of that, like Aldo and Rivera consistently stopped him at that second step. They caught him doing that dip, throwing and then trying to dip in and then commit to more hard shots. Both of them countered that defensive moment. I think Aljamain Sterling can fight more of a preventative striking battle. I think the jab is really, really important. Jose Aldo landed a lot of them. So did Jimmy Rivera. Aljamain Sterling's is a less committed, more volume attuned kind of jab. And it usually sets up some lateral movement. I think there's a real chance here for him to just not let Jan set up for one of those bursts by just not committing to anything, keeping him in that first layer where both fighters are probing, looking for the moment that one of them can sell out. I think Jan much more needs those moments to sell out than Sterling does. In fact, I think Sterling would arguably be better if he didn't go for any of those moments at all, and just moves around at range and keeps his jab in Jan's face and doesn't let him set his feet. Because that is the other thing, as I said earlier. Who has Jan faced who hasn't just stood in front of him? He wants to stand in front of you.
Well, Jose Aldo.
He kind of did, though. They kind of just stood toe to toe.
I don't know about that. I mean, Jose Aldo wasn't running away, and he wasn't moving laterally a whole lot, but he was doing Jose Aldo things, right? Like, he was pivoting off as pretty.
Yeah, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about timing.
The real answer here is John Dodson, right?
John Dodson,
a famously running away fighter.
Yes,
who did that and got completely destroyed.
Right. But that's going completely passive in the running away too.
Yeah.
Waiting for that moment of overcommitment to counter. That's kind of the worst of both worlds. You're trying to do Jimmy Rivera without forcing Jan to expose himself because you're constantly unrooted and running away. Jose Aldo stood in front of Peter Yan. They went toe to toe. And Jose Aldo did the footwork, as he often does, as like a snap second defensive option. Something he can quickly, like an explosive move in and of itself. Who has Petr Yan fought who has not let him square up and set his feet in front of his opponent? Who forces him to continually reset? Because again, it's not just about having the footwork as an answer. It's about making the footwork a barrier to the rest of Jan's game expanding. Using it so that he can't set up. I don't know. I'm not super confident in Sterling's ability to do it, but if he has success, I think we may see some surprising amount of it on the feet in that way. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to that, actually. Probably more than I had given credence to.
It just feels wrong, right, to think that Sterling is going to have any success on the feet.
No, I wouldn't go that far. I mean, my vision for how this fight needed to play out for Sterling to win was that he had on the feet, he just has such a narrow path to walk that it's unlikely he'll do it. Yeah. That, I saw this as he needs to stay at kicking distance. He needs to intercept Jan coming forward with straight kicks. He needs to disrupt his stance move with leg kicks and body kicks. Body kicking, the classic way to keep a big puncher's hands at home, and Sterling is a good body kicker. Mm-hmm. To kick, to move away, and then when Jan really commits in to try and either get safely into the clinch or to shoot into a single.
Yeah.
But again, the problem with that is historically, Sterling has not been someone who had a good reactive shot or has done very well when he tried to shoot reactively. And I think the clinch is, I think Jan's clinch is maybe a little overrated. Some of my fight site colleagues have been talking about it having like the best clinch game in MMA, and I just think that's not. There's no evidence for that in my opinion.
Sure.
He has, but what he does very, very well in the clinch, and you can see this repeatedly in the Aldo fight, is he's really good at keeping clinches in the striking dimension, not letting people tie up and get underhooks and get into more wrestling style clinches. And he's very good at hitting people off the breaks. He does a great job of controlling wrists in the clinch. I think it will be very hard for Aljo to get the kind of over-under, double-under positions he needs in the clinch to start executing slide bys, to start executing, various kind of tripping clinch takedowns. So, I really think it's going to be tough for Aljo to get into the positions and exchanges that he needs in terms of creating grappling situations. You saw in the Munoz fight too, like he did a lot of kind of non-committal shots as Munoz was coming in. It just did not work. Munoz just pushed him off. Now, how serious were those shots? Was he just trying to mix things up? Many of them didn't look that committed. I think Ben Cohn at the fight site commented on that really a lot of those Munoz shots just seemed to be almost like volume, right? For the sake of volume. But it's still not a great look that he didn't even come close on any of them against a guy just kind of plodding forward. So, and with the punching, I probably am underselling Aljo's jab and his ability to keep Jan off him a little bit there. But I really think that given that his jab's not super powerful, he doesn't throw like a really straight jab. He tends to kind of whip his elbow out a little bit. His form's not great on it. If he just does that for 3 rounds, is Jan not going to cross counter him really hard?
Yeah.
I mean, is he not going to pick up on that and
will.
start moving his head in the middle of those jabs and just bombing him? Because that's certainly within his arsenal.
Yep.
And over 5 rounds, I just think it's too narrow of a path for Aljo to walk. Unless he can create grappling exchanges and get to Jan's back, I think it's going to be exceptionally difficult for him to win a decision.
I certainly agree that it's a narrow path to walk, which is why I will not be picking Aljamain Sterling here. Because the first time he gets cross-countered, that immediately opens the door to more layers in Jan's striking. Once something works well, I mean, I'll just say it this way. Aljamain Sterling's going to duck into another head kick. Okay. He is going to
It's funny you say that. That's actually one of the ways that I see this fight ending is because his head movement is so exaggerated.
Yes.
Is Jan fakes him, baits him into a really exaggerated head movement and just shins him in the face.
Yep. If Jan gets a timing on one good counter and then next exchange, he can threaten that and get Sterling to back straight off, he's going to walk him into a head kick. Just like he did Jimmy Rivera.
Yep.
And I
just like Marlon Moraes wasn't doing quite the same thing against Aljo, but that was how he caught him.
But that opening is still there.
In a duck. Yeah.
Yep. It worked for, Moraes against Jimmy Rivera, and Jan got it to work against Jimmy Rivera. It worked for Moraes against Sterling. I suspect that, Jan will get it to work as well. Among many other things. It is the depth. It's the ability to build and press. And also, Phil, as you said very presciently before, he will just fucking go for it. Petr Yan is mean. He's super confident. If things aren't working, as we saw in the Rivera fight, which both Phil and I have a tremendously high opinion of Rivera's performance in that fight.
Yes, absolutely.
When in doubt, Petr Yan will just try to make something violent happen. So yeah, you got to pick him. I'm going to go with, I think I'm going to go with Jan by like a 4th round TKO.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's probably about right. I'm going to say that Aljo goes the distance, but I'm going to say he loses a decision, and I'll say he picks up a round. He'll lose 4-1. So Jan by unanimous decision.
All right. Phil?
I'm going to pick Sterling.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna be influenced by all these Zoomers out there. I'm not gonna let them change my mind. Call me.
I'm 38, Phil.
I don't know. There's just been too many fights where I've been like, oh, this is a super tough matchup for Sterling. Like, I genuinely never would have seen him beating. I did not see him beating Jimmy Rivera. Not really. And he didn't just beat him, he absolutely mopped the floor with him.
He kept him out of the layers.
Some of the stuff he got him with was incredibly stupid.
Yeah.
Like, he got him with like a spinning... It was a relatively competitive second round where he got him with a spinning back forearm to knock him down, which was one of the... like many parts in the tragic tale of Jimmy Rivera, the man who just cannot catch a break. But yeah, I mean, I think that I can trust Aljamain Sterling much more to control the cage where I couldn't before. Like, as you said, he tends to do wild stuff to get out of there, but he gets out of there. He doesn't put his back to the cage, which is where Jan does his best work.
Yeah.
I can trust him to throw lots of volume on the feet now and not get tired. You know, he's not going to necessarily have like the Brian Caraway fight again at this stage in his career. I can feel comfortable saying that now. And when he's getting stuck with the other guy leading on him, Jan tends to change levels and shoot, or like at least blitz in and throw like a huge, like committed strike, which leaves him more open for takedowns than that otherwise might. I mean, whilst he has incredible underhook awareness, you know, as seen in that Magomedov fight, the second one, where he's just constantly just peeling double underhooks off, defending takedowns by the cage, and eventually just starts out wrestling Magomedov at points. You know, Magomedov is just not willing to strike with him for extended periods of time.
Yeah.
And I think you can I think the flip side of Jan's incredible mental toughness and his ability to go for it is that I think you can make him mad.
Yes.
So I will take Sterling to throw incredibly stupid strikes at Jan and him to be like, what is this? This is dumb. And to try and close the distance on him like too quickly, and
at
to
the
get
end of the day,
grappling exchanges. I do think it will be close, and I do think there will be some scary moments from Sterling. But I don't know. I feel like I've underestimated him too many times, and I'm willing to take a flyer on him. I know, like the physical side of things, I do. You know, despite the fact I don't think Jan is an incredible athlete, as I said, I think he's immortally durable and in both the cardio and the like punch taking sense. I don't really think of either of those things as being applicable to Sterling, but I'll take him to like skate the line again.
Yeah.
By decision, I think.
At the end of the day, he's smart John Lineker, and you can't scare John Lineker, but you can make him pissed.
Yep.
You can frustrate and annoy him. And I think that's the route to success. And I'm glad you mentioned the Rivera fight. Like, Rivera was way more willing to just stick himself at the end, Sterling's fight with Rivera. These bantamweights, they're all fighting each other. It's tough to reference their bouts. Rivera was much more willing to stick himself in that position of like, I need a big opening to get going, and this guy's not giving me any big openings.
Well, Jimmy Rivera also moved back a lot in that fight, and if Aljo gets Jan moving backwards, then the evaluation bar will immediately swing towards Sterling, right? Just like if he gets him down, like really gets him down, it will immediately swing towards Sterling.
So that is a difference, but I do think in the same way as Sterling did in that fight, I like the way you're thinking, Phil. Like, there is an opportunity to just annoy the shit out of the guy who's just waiting for something obvious to pounce on. And so yeah, there's something there. Still picking Jan. I think we went on so long on this fight. We probably went ahead and stuck a segment break in the middle of that chat somewhere. So do you guys want to just, run right ahead and quickly make picks?
Yeah,
for
that's fine.
The third title fight on this card?
That's fine.
All right. Well, I'm picking Amanda Nunes.
I'm also picking Amanda Nunes.
Yeah, I'm picking Nunes.
Why is this fight happening? Why at featherweight?
Because Anderson can't make bantamweight, and Nunes hasn't knocked her out yet.
This is just them
because they need to justify the featherweight division existing, so they can be like, we have a 2-division champ, the female GOAT. So Anderson is riding her streak against Zara Fen dos Santos and Norma Dumont Viana.
Well known
into this fight.
Women's featherweight contenders.
Yeah, I think the end game here for the UFC is probably to try and get Kayla Harrison in with Amanda Nunes.
Yeah.
That would be my guess.
There's actually some interest to me in that one. I'll tell you the main reason why. Oh, sorry, Phil, go on.
The game is simply that they want as many belts as possible, so they have contractually they can put contractually obligated pay-per-views on, and they can be like, ooh, look at this one, it's a triple header.
Mm-hmm.
3 belts on the line.
Yep. I tend to agree.
Yeah, fair enough.
I'll tell you why I'm picking it so confidently. Not that I necessarily need to. It's not even a striking thing where Nunes gets so much done. I think Nunes can just, at any time she wants, out-wrestle Megan Anderson.
No.
Yep.
No.
Not Megan Anderson, who got dominated for 3 rounds by Holly Holm purely in the wrestling.
I think that's the really big thing, is that Megan Anderson, you can critique her striking. It's like she has 3 minutes of pretty good looking kind of technical boxing, and then it starts to devolve and she's just like a big size bully type. But really, like, the glaring weakness is the wrestling, by which I mean there is none.
Yeah, she hates grappling.
She hates it. Not only does she have no wrestling, she's profoundly uncomfortable on the ground. To this day, she has not gathered enough experience, even in the gym, to not, like, instantly start visibly freaking out when it goes there. She hates it. So, yeah.
You guys want to hear an anecdote you'll have to edit out?
Are you daring me to not edit it out? That's what that sounded like.
I would be really pissed off if you didn't. But it's you'll appreciate it. So
there you go.
But getting back to things that I'm comfortable putting on air.
I put this marker in. Anecdote Tom insists on cutting. Piece of shit. Come on.
Bonus episode. James Charles in the Patreon.
For $3, Tom will slander a bunch of professionals in his field.
Who I will then later see, and they will beat me up.
All right.
No, but I think one of the things that's going to be really hard for Anderson, as it's hard for anybody who fights Nunes, is, I think for a lot of women, they've just never been exposed to that kind of power before.
Certainly not, yeah.
I think that's a real issue. And I don't just mean in a fight, but I mean even in the gym. Because if you spend much time around fight gyms, like, men and women will spar together, especially in MMA. It's good about that, actually. Mm-hmm. But it is very rare that you will see a male pro fighter really going after a female fighter hard. Yeah. Like, they'll go with them, they'll work with them. They're not pulling their punches, but they're not really trying to hurt them. And most male pro fighters get used to power in the gym by having other big professional fighter guys just go after them and try to tear their heads off. Yeah. It's not every day, but it happens, and they've all experienced it and they know how to deal with it. But for most women, if men don't go after them like that, there are not many women kicking around MMA gyms who have the kind of power that Amanda Nunes does, where someone like Anderson is going to have the experience of sparring rounds, much less fights, I where think she's had to deal with somebody who can punch like that.
I think the exact opposite, in fact, that or the inverse of that Megan Anderson is, in fact, the one who is unusually powerful for a woman.
Yes.
In her sparring sessions. And I think she very much fights like a bully. She just doesn't like pushback. She doesn't like things not going her way, including her own attacks. She doesn't like when they're not as successful as I assume they probably frequently are in the gym.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, her technique will just sort of crumble after a first minute because I think she gets frustrated or whatever, uncertain. And yeah, Nunes is not only capable of standing up to harder shots and going toe to toe in like a purely male idiot fashion, like against Cyborg, like that is a real dude style. That was a dick measuring contest.
It was
between two women.
I mean, this was apparently her, one of the reasons why her and Nina Ansaroff got together, right? Is that she was like super impressed that Nina Ansaroff could take her punches.
That is really like something disturbingly sweet about it. Actually, it's it's kind of
like,
sweet.
Wow, you're tough. Like woman from two, possibly 3 weight classes below me.
It's sort of like an Amazon Scythian myth, right? Like the woman is looking for the man who can out wrestle her, and only when she meets him will she finally settle down and marry. I don't know. There's something romantic and disturbing about that. But yeah, Amanda Nunes, that's it. There's hardly anything more needs to be said. Megan Anderson either like doesn't win or she wins like quickly and is completely in control the whole time. That's not going to happen.
Or she toes her in the eye.
Yep. her win over a grappler.
All right. Well, that's pretty much it for this week's episode. Tom, thank you once again 1,000 times.
Do you guys not want to talk about Dober Makachev at all?
I don't think we're going to have time for it. If you want to stick around for a minute and talk with us for a bonus episode, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, I can do that. I got some notes. I want to talk about that fight.
Beautiful. Me too.
Sorry to interrupt your outro.
No, you're fine. I want to talk about it as well, and I especially, because of Makachev, as with Sterling, I want your insights on his grappling game.
Yeah.
But we have filled up more than an hour just discussing these 3-2 title fights. So Tom, what do you have to plug for us before we wrap up? Anything, you have put out or your colleagues that you want the listeners to see?
I would say for myself, if you're interested in jiu-jitsu, fake martial art or not, there is a new podcast from the Fight Site. That's myself, Matt Joya, and Ben Cohn discussing the ins and outs of grappling, things like how to build a game, talking about some of the stars of the sport, what makes them effective. It's called Say Os Again, available on the Fight Site Podcast Network, as are all of our fine podcasts. And especially for this card, a fight like Sterling and Jan did not go unnoticed by the analysts over there. So we've got a lot of great content, both podcasts and written roundtables. So go check out thefightsite.com and soak up that good content.
Really micro-targeting a specific audience with that title, because there's a lot of people who aren't into jiu-jitsu who won't even know how os is spelled based on its pronunciation. It's OSU, folks. OSU. Os.
And in fact, Matt Joya, our podcast host, was too young to understand that was a Pulp Fiction reference. So there's that. Oh my God,
that is really upsetting. I have never been madder at him. Jesus. Okay, so definitely check that out. I have, unlike you, Tom, I don't lie to people I do podcasts with and tell them I listen to their show. I haven't heard it yet, but I have heard great things about it.
It is not G-rated. I will warn you all of that.
Perfect. Neither am I. So that sounds really good. Yeah. Ben, of course, and Matt, both also great analysts, and fun guys to talk to. So I'm sure that's fantastic. Check that out. What's it called? Say Os Again.
Yes, that's it.
Phil, go on, disappoint me, you son of a bitch.
I do not have anything coming out, but I did enjoy reading Ben Cohn's at Agent Benton's breakdown of the grappling in the Sterling-Jan matchup, specifically, focusing on Sterling's predilection for back takes.
And the clinch as well, right? I think I read that one as well. Yeah, and it was very good. Ben's actually, he's kind of a good writer,
Yeah.
Got a nice, approachable sort of conversational voice. Really makes it easy to understand. Check that out. That's on thefightsite.com. We're constantly plugging the goddamn fightsite.com. I'm not even going to tell you there's a hyphen in it this time. We plug it so often, you should have it memorized by now. Find us all on social media. You can find Phil at Evil Greg Jackson. Tom is, Moy Cowboy, right?
Yes.
At Moy Cowboy. Another great pun that is really confusingly spelled for anyone who's just hearing me say it. Figure it out. And at Boxing Bush, B-U-S-C-H. That one I will spell for you. Thank you all so much for listening to today's episode. If you want to hear Tom stick around to discuss Islam Makhachev versus Drew Dober, possibly Phil and I touching on a couple of these other undercard fights, check out the Heavy Hands Patreon. $3 a month gets you access to all of our bonus episodes. And I gotta say, we've actually been doing a good job the last several months of getting out at least 2 every month. So make sure you check that out. Help support us. We really appreciate it. We appreciate you all listening. And until next week, when we get to sink our teeth into what actually happened at UFC 259, just thanks for tuning in. If you came here for the finer points of face punching, came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.